most of what needs to happen is a change of attitude that's systematic. So it needs leadership from the top, and it also needs people on the ground being able to implement that and understanding why they're being asked to do these additional things and how it's actually feeding into a wider vision.
My name is Deepesh Patel. Around 15% of the global population live with disabilities. 80% of those are in developing markets. For the trade and supply chain finance world, this presents a significant opportunity for more inclusivity. This benefits everyone. Welcome to Trade Treasury Payments, the podcast unlocking the future of cross-border finance.
From transaction banking and money movements
to liquidity, treasury, and cash management.
We bring you expert insights and the latest trends shaping global finance. The Asian Development Bank's Trade and Supply Chain Finance Program recently launched a 2-year disability inclusion project to improve accessibility for people with disabilities in partner banks across Asia. By working with 88 banks in over 14 countries, the project helped institutions identify and address barriers to inclusion, ranging from physical impediments to communication challenges, with notable success stories, including with the National Bank of Pakistan and TBC Bank in Georgia, transforming their practices. I'm delighted to be joined today by Maka Bochorishvili, Environmental, Social and Governance Coordinator at TBC Bank, Asim Baig, Group Head of the HR Management Division at the National Bank of Pakistan, and Catherine Holloway, Professor of Interaction Design and Innovation at UCL's Interaction Center and co-founder and academic director of the Global Disability Innovation Hub. They all recently spoke on an ADB webinar, and I was really curious to find out more and build on those conversations to discuss how financial institutions globally assess and improve their accessibility across employment, culture, product access, and partnerships. So, quick introduction, and I know I briefly introduced your roles, but tell me a little bit more about what you do and what has primarily motivated you all to work so much on disability inclusion. Maka, over to you to start, please.
Thank you, Deepesh, and I am happy to be here to share TBC Bank's initiatives and inspiration, why we started with work. First of all, I would like to mention that TBC Bank is the leading financial institution in the country and serves more than 1 million people. Furthermore, the number of our employees is around 9,000, and these are the very good motivations for us. Of course, we did a few initiatives in the past, but what we identified was that we did not have a comprehensive approach towards services for people with disabilities and employment for people with disabilities. So this was our main motivation to create a standard for everything and to become an example in the country.
Thank you very much, Maka. So you saw the problem and you looked to address that. Asim, was it a similar story for you?
Yeah, pretty much. First of all, thanks, Deepesh. It's a pleasure to be here. The National Bank of Pakistan is a national institution, state-owned, and it's one of the largest banks in Pakistan. So other than the fact that we are one of the largest banks, being the nation's bank, we hold a deep responsibility for fostering an inclusive workplace. If I talk about my own motivation, it's working on disability inclusion and that belief that every individual deserves equal opportunity, regardless of physical or cognitive challenges. And banking should be a space where accessibility is a right and not a privilege. And NBP is committed to ensuring that individuals with disabilities can access our services and contribute meaningfully as employees. I've worked firsthand with people with disabilities, and I've seen that they face barriers both in professional and personal settings. And that is why I feel so strongly about working towards removing those obstacles. And we are doing that within our organization, and there's still a lot to be done, but we are deeply committed to diversity and inclusion, and that really resonates with me.
Thank you so much. And Kathy, as co-founder of GDIH, what was your primary motivation?
I suppose my personal experience of disability started when I was a child, and I grew up in a nursing home. My parents were in nursing homes. And the first thing you realize in a nursing home is that it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, old age catches up with you and you are not able to do some things. That was my motivation for wondering, how do we make sure that people stay as independent as possible, but also connected to their community for as long as possible? And that started from a very young age. And so we started the Global Disability Innovation Hub in 2016. I was lucky enough to work alongside the people who had led the London 2012 Paralympic and Olympic Games. And we realized that you need to work at sectorial change to make a real difference to society. And so in this financial inclusion project with the Asian Development Bank and the partnered banks that we are working with, we're able to support and guide, but also create together initiatives that will sustain people's ability to access banking, which we know should be a fundamental human right and sometimes is left as an afterthought for people with disabilities.
Thank you very much, Cathy. I remember the 2012 Paralympic swimming there, so I have very fond memories of that. I guess outside of what you see in London and the UK, I guess looking at Asia Pacific perhaps, and also other regions around the world, have you noticed promising innovations in disability inclusive banking? And also, how would you say the cultural differences across countries actually affect how some of these disability inclusion programs that you implement in banking actually are affected and changed?
Great question. If you go back to London 2012, just for a second, and not to focus too much on the UK, but one of the biggest things that had to change was a change of attitude. When the UK public were first polled about whether they would buy tickets to the Paralympics, less than 1% of people would buy tickets. And there was a massive drive to shift people's attitudes from not thinking of people with disabilities as something you don't want to be around, something you want to avoid, something that you want to stay away from, and actually embracing this diversity and understanding what benefit it brings to us in society. And so if you transpose that onto the banking sector, you asked a question at the end of what you just said, which was, what's the differences between different places? And I would say that pretty much the fundamental similarity is that most of what needs to happen is a change of attitude that's systematic. So it needs leadership from the top, and it also needs people on the ground being able to implement that and understanding why they're being asked to do this additional things and how it's actually feeding into a wider vision for the banks. And when we speak to our colleagues here in National Bank of Pakistan, for example, and hear some of their stories, it has that leadership. Same thing with TCP Bank, having that leadership of the top leading, but also people being empowered to make change. And when we think about that in the global context, people with disabilities are the largest unbanked minority in the world. It's a phenomenal market opportunity for us as well, but also a service to society. And we can see examples globally of how people are trying to step in to make banking more inclusive for persons with disabilities. So here in the UK, we have SIBSTAR, which was developed with a collaboration between the Alzheimer's Society and MasterCard. And the idea was that it would help people manage their finances securely, but that's viral now. Lots of people are using it. So we see people who maybe have gambling addictions being able to use it, but also people with learning impairments being able to use it. Equally, if we go to Kenya, we have the M-Pesa, the mobile banking tool, is now voice guarded. It has full integration for people with visual impairments, but that also benefits everybody. There are times when you don't want to look at your phone, you're rushing, so you can use voice interaction. You don't have to be looking at your phone. So we see lots of examples like this globally. And once we get banks to collaborate with disabled customers and also with the disabled colleagues that exist within their workforce already, we find that you get much more effective and fruitful innovations coming along. And those cultural barriers which do exist, and each country has its own specific nuance of bias or stigma towards maybe one type of disability or another type of disability, those can be overcome when we work together.
Thank you very much. And it's really interesting facts you pulled out there that the most unbanked population in the world is the disabled population. Asim, what's your story as a leader, leading your front line per se, from a National Bank of Pakistan perspective? And also, I guess one interesting question is obviously Islamic banking principles do have differences to other banking principles. And how have you aligned those with disability inclusion initiatives?
As I said earlier, that we've seen people up close and personal, people with disabilities who have faced barriers both in professional and personal life. So that kind of built that in me that we need to work towards an environment where they feel welcomed and they have the opportunity. And I, as an individual, want to ensure that everyone, regardless of their abilities, has equal access to opportunities and they feel valued. And ultimately, I believe that creating an inclusive work environment helps everyone succeed and contribute to more innovative, engaged, and diverse organization. And we need to lead by example as leaders, and we need to walk the talk and ensure that it is part of our DNA and it's not just something, a check box that we do or tick box and we just move on. And secondly, a very interesting question here about Islamic banking. So Islamic banking is built on the principles of fairness, equity, and social justice. And these principles naturally align with disability inclusion initiatives in many ways. One is zakat and social responsibility. For example, Islamic banking promotes charitable contributions, which we call zakat, to support vulnerable groups, and that includes people with disabilities. Second is ethical financing, prohibition of exploitative practices, ensuring that financing is accessible and equitable, making financial services more inclusive for PWDs. Third is equity-based financing. So instead of interest-based loans, Islamic banking models such as Mudarba, partnership, and Masharka, which is equity financing, can create accessible financial products for people with disabilities, ensuring they have equal opportunities for entrepreneurship and personal finance. Just as Islamic banking promotes the empowerment of individuals by providing them with fair and accessible financial services, and disability inclusion seeks to remove barriers and equal participation for people with disabilities, kind of linked together. And if we embrace both, we can build a more inclusive and just society where people with disabilities have the tools and also the resources to thrive and make most of the opportunities that they have.
Thanks, Baig. So it's essentially intertwined with Sharia law through zakat, ethical financing, and various forms of equity-based financing. Maka, let's pivot to you to talk about Georgia, because I would imagine that Georgia's post-Soviet transition influenced attitudes towards disability inclusion in the workplace. What's been the journey from your perspective and also from TBC Bank's perspective?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I have to mention that people with disabilities, they were invisible in the Soviet times and maybe the decades after as well. So not only in the workplace, but in schools as well, in kindergartens and so on, you could not see them. They did not exist for the society. What has been done until now in Georgia is very important. However, we have a long way ahead. So maybe 20, 15 years ago around, we started to improve the approaches. We had financing from international partners, so European Union countries, and developed programs for early development in kindergartens, for example, and schools to have inclusive education, for example. Because workplace inclusion, it depends on the education and depends on the previous steps as well. However, until now, the most of schools are not adapted to all needs and possibilities, which gives a lot of room for work for private sector. In country, we have a regulation for people with disabilities to ensure that they have all the opportunities for education, work, social life. This is also very important to be included in social lives, right? However, the target year to achieve the full inclusion is in Georgia 2035. So it means that around 10 years, the country and the private sector has still time to do something important there. For us at the TBC Bank, of course, we are focusing on services and on the digitalization of services. And different types of services allow people with disabilities to have more services received during the last years. Furthermore, we have as well few procedures which we use in our branches. However, there is a need to develop different modes and different instruments, technologies to serve all the needs. As well mentioned, this is the basic human right of a person to receive financial services. And very often it is seen as a secondary task. So in our case, we think that the universal design and technologies help us to create a more inclusive environment for our customers and employees.
Thank you very much. I mean, the overarching piece to that message, Maka, is that it is a human right, but identifying some of the challenges, e.g., lack of education, the need to actually adapt schools and also create disability inclusion regulation are key critical steps to actually address this. Let's talk about some personal stories. Kathy, I know you talked about your inspiration behind this project, but I'd like to hear what inspired you to co-found the Global Disability Innovation Hub. And would you be able to talk about, since 2016, how its mission has evolved over time, and perhaps share a couple of interesting personal stories that might be relevant in this podcast?
Sure. We set up the Global Disability Innovation Hub, as I said, on the back of the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And I was an academic. I'd just become an academic at University College London. And they were going to be the anchor tenant for the new Education and Cultural District in Stratford. And that's in East London. So most people who visit London don't come to East London. They stay out west. And East London was very different. It was quite poor. It's still quite poor. Half the children in the boroughs are living below the poverty line, for example. So it's not what people think of maybe when they think of London. And UCL's mission has always been to do the greatest good for the greatest number. And so we built on that to build the GDI Hub. And the critical point was to try and bring all the different people that care about disability inclusion together. So I suppose you can look at a global sector and you can say there's these wonderful policies like the UN Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disability. And most governments now around the world will have ratified that and will have good level of law about inclusion of persons with disability. And most will have some budget assigned to certain parts of that. And then on the ground, you'll have lots of disabled persons organizations or organizations of persons with disability doing some very good work. And generally, they don't meet in the middle. So we saw this opportunity to be this connector in the middle where we could bring people with large amounts of power and funding together with the people who really understood the problems. And if we did that well, we could help the people with the power and the money to make better informed decisions and therefore not waste opportunities, but also not waste resource. At the same time, there would be increased benefit for those people who are living a life that's often more disadvantaged, especially at the start. And that's how we started. And we've been lucky enough to grow from an idea, 3 people getting together with different backgrounds. One's a social scientist, economist, Victoria Austin, and then Ian McKinnon, who works on built environment, making built environments inclusive, and myself was more into technology and what can we do for inclusive design in the tech space. And it was 3 people in an idea, and we've grown it from that to an academic research centre based at UCL, but with global partners, and a not-for-profit organisation, which has a joint portfolio of about $100 million of research and practice. And we employ about 70 people across numerous countries, and I think we have over 100 partnerships now. So we've evolved from, I think, thinking initially we'd be a relatively small team to realizing that you need these sort of T-shaped people, we call them. We need people with deep expertise. So for example, on this project, we have Polly, who's one of our research fellows, and she has a deep expertise in finance alongside people who can understand innovation from start to finish. So how we co-design with partners right from the beginning through to execution to make sure that they're able to sustain any intervention we work on and make it their own once we step aside. And we've practiced that model over and over again. So for example, in Asia recently, we've run Activaron, which was our first assistive technology accelerator. And on the back of that, we supported over 20 ventures, and they are now scaling, and we're about to support another 50 this year. And that's all around working with the institutes in India, the IITs in India, IIT Delhi and IIT Madras, as well as local disabled persons organizations, and building a team that's able to support ventures to scale in India, to scale beyond India in Asia, but also to access global links that we have. So a few of the ventures are now looking to enter European and UK markets. Others are actually looking to enter African markets because they see a greater need there. So trying to make the case globally for disability innovation, I think, has been where we've moved. And also in light of recent politics, really looking at the justice framework. We've heard some wonderful examples here about not exploiting people and giving people their human rights. So how do we ensure that the playing field is level for people and that they are able to fully come into society and thrive and have a life that they want? And of course, banking and the finance sector is critical to that. Each one of us depends every day on multiple transactions that come in and out of our lives. And if we're not able to make that and we don't have control over that, then we lose autonomy over many other dimensions of our lives.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I think it's really important to drill home that message. And I think for any transaction bankers listening to this podcast, what are those calls to action? Hey, enjoying this podcast? Hit that follow button for more. Done? Let's get back to it. Asim, can you share a specific success story from National Bank of Pakistan concerning disability inclusion and the project that you've been working on?
So NBP has taken a lot of concrete steps towards disability inclusion, but one significant initiative that I would want to talk about is our accessible banking program. We have implemented Braille-enabled ATMs, ensuring visually impaired individuals can independently manage their finances. Secondly, our inclusive hiring program actively recruits individuals with disabilities, placing them in key roles across different banking functions. And this is something that we have been doing for a number of years. And that is one of the reasons that the National Bank employs the highest number of PWDs in the financial sector. We have also collaborated with disability rights organizations to conduct accessibility audits across our branches, ensuring infrastructure improvements as we have hired the highest number of PWDs across the industry in Pakistan. Our president has given instructions that any new branch that we open, we will try to ensure that it has all facilities available for PWDs so that we don't have to go back and revamp them. So we have infrastructure ready for contact center comprising of visually impaired staff. That contact center is going to be equipped with all people who are visually impaired. So that is something that we're really proud of. We have onboarded disability consultants to support us with this initiative also.
Thanks, Asim. Maka, how are TBC Bank Georgia's IT academies being adapted to accommodate students with different types of disabilities? Because I know we previously talked about some of the great projects that are going on, but I'd like you to talk about this.
As you already understood, TBC is a technological company, not only a financial services company. And this is the area where we see that we can empower people. In IT academies, we have various training courses which last typically up to 6 months. And we create new experiences and new expertise, which are very valuable at our market and not only in Georgia. So we were thinking how we can reach more people, especially as well people with disabilities, with our training courses. As I already talked previously, the infrastructure in Georgia is not so developed, so people with disabilities even have a lot of barriers to get from one point to another. Therefore, first decision we had was that our training courses should be mostly online. So this online format gives to many participants to be flexible and not to miss the training courses. There is as well a phenomenon, someone starts the training courses and then prematurely somehow give up because they could not come to the facilities and so on. We have few examples. I would like only mention, for example, one example where our participants used hearing sound amplifier applications because they had hearing impairment, and of course with a place sounds or the sound quality which we would have, for example, in a room, it would not be possible. So online it was possible better. So our training courses, of course, they are evolving because we have a lot of types of disabilities and we would like to cover more and more. However, of course, the infrastructure is a barrier and we are thinking how to give to more people the opportunity to join our training courses. However, the online mode remains the main focus here.
Thanks, Maka. And just to extend on that, would you agree with me then that the rise of many emerging technologies are probably going to have a fairly big impact on banking accessibility as we look forward? I mean, where are you placing your bets in terms of those emerging technologies?
I absolutely agree, Deepesh. The development of the technologies will play, and they already play, a great role in the increased level of inclusion. For example, design thinking. This is the approach where the products and services are developed with the universal design. It's about to give the services, products to every person. And this approach is as well used in TBC, not only in TBC, worldwide, by the leading companies to develop services. Another technology which will as well support is artificial intelligence for adaptation of services. Very often, for example, reading materials, training courses, and so on are available in foreign languages, like in English. And translation is then done manually by persons, for example. Artificial intelligence can adapt, for example, the reading materials and training materials. And not only because the services can as well learn behavioral patterns, and artificial intelligence can offer to the users the tailored service. Especially for a local context, it is very important. Additionally, of course, we have other examples with challenges with how to put a signature there, how to confirm different types of transactions, and so on. And here as well, for example, high-tech technologies help to provide a better financial service. So the hope really is in technologies. I see that it will accelerate the process and we can achieve the higher inclusion with these technologies in the future and in the nearest future.
Thank you very much. Final question to all of you, and very quickly, 60 seconds or less. What advice would you give to transaction bankers, call it the trade, treasury, or payments community, that are perhaps just starting their disability inclusion journey, but perhaps have limited resources? So what advice? Asim, I'm going to come to you first.
It's a very important question because there are a lot of banks out there right now which probably do not have the financial strength to go all out. What they can do is that they can start with accessibility audits. They can identify low-cost adjustments such as signages, ramps, or digital accessibility features. Another thing that they can do, and probably they can do it in-house also, is train staff on disability awareness. Sensitization workshops for frontline employees can significantly improve service experiences for PWDs. Another thing that is easy and it's doable is leverage technology. Implement voice-assisted ATMs, mobile banking features, and AI-driven chatbots to improve accessibilities. Partner with NGOs and experts. Collaboration with disability inclusion advocates can provide valuable insights without heavy financial investment. And they can also adopt inclusive hiring practices. Small-scale efforts in hiring PWDs can set the foundation for a more inclusive workforce.
Thank you very much. And if I may, it might be worth signposting to the ADB Trade and Supply Chain Finance Program Disability Inclusion Hub, which includes that self-assessment tool. I just tried downloading it and I can. It's very simple, but there are 4 other tools that banks can access today, irrespective of what bank you are and where you're from. Maka, what's your advice?
Well, maybe 2 very practical things. One, what we did was we invited people with different disabilities to go the journey, for example, in a branch, and to show us which barriers they meet and what they would like to have. So this is as well, so Baig mentioned, financially very light approach, right? Because people with disabilities there are ready to support the development of different processes and they give always very detailed feedback. And it's very valuable in the process of development. I think every organization can do it. The second, for employment. What we did, for example, we had a working meeting with our colleagues from Human Capital Management Department, and we talked about a few types of disabilities and asking them if they imagine that people with disabilities might occupy certain roles in the company. And then we started with 2 or 3 of them because it's really very difficult to approach the whole company. However, to make successful cases is very motivating then for the future projects.
Thank you very much. So I guess I could even summarize that as think about your feedback loop, but also start small, just do it and get on with it and really see and celebrate that success. Kathy, what's your advice?
I agree with everything that's been said, especially looking at the ADB Hub with the tools that have been designed to exactly help people on the path that they're on. And I would ask banks to look inwardly. I think you have the opportunity to unlock potential. There will be people in your bank that are living with disabilities as staff and probably haven't declared them, or have family members that have disabilities and are desperate to change things. And you can leverage that passion, but also help people. You can change attitudes. So it surprises people sometimes when I explain that I have disabilities, because people think I'm a professor and I do these things. And then I tell the great story of GDI Hub. And then I say, and by the way, before I set up GDI Hub, I had a breakdown because my mental health was so bad. And I promised not to tell anybody until after I became a professor, because I thought nobody would make me a professor if they thought I had mental health issues. It can be shocking for people to hear that. And yet it can help to try and change the attitudes of people. I now coach and mentor many people globally. And I know many CEOs, many C-suite people who have a lot of mental health issues and hide them deliberately because they're scared of the stigma that surrounds those things. So I think that there is untapped talent in the workforce. And there's also, as Maka just mentioned, local communities that will be very happy and willing to come in and support a bank on their journey to uncovering things. So you can start very small. You can start with people just coming into branches, having conversations, making small adaptations, championing the people who have done that. You can feed that back into that feedback loop, but also into the advancement route. So when you're being appraised, your annual appraisals can be linked to what have you done. If you've done something in this space, then there's a bonus or there's some sort of recognition. So I think there's an awful lot of things people can do. I'll just end on technology. Maka mentioned the role of AI. We're currently collecting data sets so that people with non-standard speech, so if you have slurred speech, you're able to speak and the technology will understand you. And that can help people unlock mobile banking, unlock telephone banking, unlock conversations in branches. And currently, nearly all of that technology is in American English. And we're collecting that data in all languages, or trying to get to all languages. We're starting with African languages, but trying to make sure that all languages are included. So we don't have this gap between what's possible for people who speak American English versus what's possible for people that speak Turkish or some other language that's equally as important.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And what an inspirational way to end this truly insightful podcast. I think for transaction bankers, it's important to look around, unlock potential, start small, and embrace tech. Maka, Asim, Kathy, thank you very much for joining us on this podcast. It's been such a pleasure. And don't forget to follow Treasury Payments
on your favorite podcast platform.
Thanks for listening.